Welcome to another dungeon design video. I'm your host, Atten, here at We Love TTRPGs, and if you love tabletop role-playing games like we love tabletop role-playing games, then you're in the right place. Today, we're going to learn about some of the very first design choices to consider when creating monstrous lairs for adventurers to explore and conquer. Understanding the broad scope of the word dungeon and the context of our tabletop role-playing games, this video will focus primarily on dungeons of the underground variety, where bad things guarding great treasures can be found. If you have not watched the other videos in this series, you might want to check out that playlist after you finish watching this one.
Check it out.
Especially if you still have unanswered questions. It's possible you'll find the answers you're looking for there. The first dungeon creation video covered my basic design philosophy and touched briefly on multiple aspects of the topic. Now, with subsequent videos, we'll be focusing our attention on specific details. This video covers all the very first things you need to address when creating a dungeon: your final boss and reward, the minions, the ecology, and the entrance to your underground lair. I won't be telling you what you must or must not do. Your creativity needs wings, not shackles and lead shoes. Nobody should try to mandate your creativity. Fantasy dungeons are just that, fantasy. And you're free to be as outrageous as you wish. Or you might seek to create something that has a feeling of realism. This video isn't about limiting your options. I'm going to explain some initial steps I take and discuss the ramifications of your design choices, whatever those may be. I was drawing my first dungeons soon after I started playing D&D in 1980, and frankly, they weren't too well thought out. I used to just plop down some graph paper and start drawing rooms and halls. Back then, I was really just setting up loosely connected combat encounters, and for some reason, the monsters in one location never seemed interested in what was happening in the rooms across from them. That was typical of design back then, prior to what many call the Hickman Revolution. We didn't need a backstory or even a front story. Back then, the entirety of D&D was about breaking into someone's home, killing them, and stealing their stuff. Well, alright, we still do that today, but your character has a tragic backstory now, so it's okay. As a dungeon master, you'll develop a creative style all your own, but be cautious of allowing realism to become the antithesis of fun. Each DM will need to find their own version of balance between the two extremes and what works best for your group. If you just wish to grab some graph paper and start drawing shapes, there's nothing wrong with that. This can even be a great way to practice and experiment with ideas to improve your craft, which is ultimately what became of my earliest designs. But when you have some guidance, as I hope my videos on this topic will offer, you should be able to create fantastic dungeons for your adventures, and before long, you'll be creating dungeons worthy of publication. The very first question to ask yourself is, why are the adventurers coming here? What is the ultimate reward? And who or what is the final boss guarding that reward? In some cases, simply defeating the final boss may be the only reward. If, for example, the creature has been threatening local settlement. The final reward could also be a specific object: coins and gems, a valuable piece of information, the release of hostages, or anything else your adventurers might seek to acquire. Remember, when granting material possessions, it's best to give too little than too much. You can always give more treasure later, but it's really difficult and highly inadvisable to remove treasure from the game that was granted due to game master error. You'll lose the trust of your players, and it can be a difficult journey to earn that back. Most players are pretty understanding and will forgive all kinds of errors and rulings, but if you take away a powerful magic item that you gave them, that builds resentment. Now that you've determined the reward for completing your yet-to-be-drawn dungeon, it is preferable to know who the final boss is. Why did that boss monster choose this location, and how long have they been there? Knowing this allows us to create a lair that is tailored to them. Then, when you know the identity of your final boss, you can decide who the other dungeon occupants are, the rank and file, the minions to your boss, or maybe even wandering monsters if you have any. This step is connected to our next, which really can't be overlooked: we should have some idea of what the dungeon inhabitants eat to sustain themselves. What do your monsters eat when they aren't eating adventurers? We also want to know what impact the dungeon is having on the local environment. In some cases, nearby settlements will have become that source of food. Obviously, civilized areas will not look kindly on monstrous neighbors eating them. Having answered these preliminary questions, we're ready to take the next step, the one you've likely been waiting for. Actually drawing our dungeon. To do this, we should know who built it and why. Is this an ancient site taken over by the monsters now living there? Was it a tomb filled with traps? Psst, check out my traps video. Is it a well-used and heavily guarded fortress prison dungeon? And so on. The possibilities are endless. However, the design of your labyrinth, just as your traps, should reflect the capabilities and needs of those who built it. This is really the only recommended limitation on our imagination if we want to create an illusion of realism. To show you the results of these steps, we're going to take a quick look at a recent dungeon of my own. In this example, I have a colony of skulks living in some natural caverns wedged between a city sewer and the dungeon of an evil cult built over a fortified fortress. The skulks are the descendants of human criminals that hid in the sewer long ago to escape prosecution. We can make simple assumptions about why the sewer, the fortress, the dungeon, and the natural caverns exist. These are pretty straightforward and don't require a lot of explanations. We also know who lives here and why. I then added a few wandering monsters appropriate to the setting. Some ghouls, a rust monster, a Mama Otyugh, and her 2 Otyugh children. For some reason, I think of the mama as a cow and her children as calves. You know, like just your typical sewer-dwelling poop cattle. Now, Papa Otyugh was there too, but in a different part of the sewer. He had been transformed into an undead Otyugh ghoul that infected victims of its tentacle strikes with rot grub. Now, really, that was just me thinking about how gross it would be to get slapped by an undead poop monster that smeared feces and aggressive burrowing worms into its victims.
Oh, my players love me.
Obviously, the skulk steer clear of all those other monsters. From a design perspective, the Otyugh family were just there to waste player resources and almost serve as traps, since there's absolutely nothing to gain from fighting them. This type of design was probably influenced by Gary Gygax's creating encounters intended to do nothing but sap party resources and were best avoided if possible. Back to the skulks, these cowardly creatures would often have one or more of their most skilled members leave the sewers at night to steal food from city storehouses or other easily accessible locations, though never enough to draw great suspicion of their presence. Living on the fringes of society, they were vulnerable to food scarcity, and in hard times they might feed on small vermin or the occasional human who carelessly wandered into their sewers alone. This was often the fate of missing children and intoxicated vagrants. The skulks were also very cautious not to engage in combat with intruders that would put up a meaningful fight. Thus, the city guard patrols ordered to investigate the sewers remained oblivious to the skulks' existence. The evil cultists from the fortress knew of the skulks, but allowed them to remain in exchange for sacrificial offerings. In this section of natural caves grew fungi, which the skulks ate when other food was scarce. Fortunately for them, over many generations of building up resistance, the poisonous effects of the fungi were no longer harmful, but to trespassers just encountering the fungus, it could prove deadly. The skulks also used the toxic vegetation to enhance the effectiveness of traps throughout the territory they inhabited. Referencing my traps video, this toxic vegetation would be considered a natural trap, cultivated for the defense of the skulk's lair. As my example has shown, it is helpful to understand your dungeon's ecosystem. You don't need a meal plan or daily calorie tracker, but you should have a reasonable idea of what the creatures are eating. If you haven't put any thought into this, it could result in a one-dimensional and cartoonish video game feeling dungeon. If that's what you're trying to create, it's fine. But if you wish to establish some semblance of realism, then providing a food source not only addresses an important step in dungeon design, it also offers us a potential springboard for more creative ideas. Does the food itself have a backstory? Why is it there? Is it doing anything to defend itself against the monsters feeding on it? In my sewer skulk example, This might explain all of the missing persons posters found throughout the city. Another common city sewer example is a pack of wererats. Creatures of this type could easily overtake a town, infecting the entire population. However, wererats impose limits on their population size and never grow so large that they risk killing or driving off the settlement above them. This is because wererats are parasitic. Without a community on which to feed, they would starve themselves out of existence. The wererats, as with the skulks, show us the relationship between dungeon inhabitants and the civilizations closest to them. Now that we have decided on the primary population of our subterranean abode, and what they eat, assuming these aren't undead that only eat happiness, we can begin drawing the walls of our rooms and corridors. First, how many entrances does our dungeon have? I'm pretty sure most of my early dungeon designs only had one entrance. And there's nothing wrong with that. But there are consequences for those living there. A single entrance dungeon can be a useful design choice if the inhabitants want total control over who enters and leaves. A tomb, for example, isn't necessarily going to need multiple entrances unless, as in the case of the original Tomb of Horrors, those additional entrances are actually just death traps that lead not further into the tomb, but rather to a quick ending for the adventurers. On the other hand, if your dungeon complex has inhabitants that are concerned about being invaded, they might want a secret hidden escape route, especially their leader. And many, if not most intelligent, organized groups of monsters will have formed some type of hierarchy. Will the monsters work together? And are the entrances guarded? What happens if the adventurers alert those living there? Will the monsters prepare to defend themselves? The entrance to your dungeon and how inhabitants might respond to invaders can be just as important as the rest of your creation. Back in the late 90s, I nearly oversaw a TPK in a campaign I had been running for 5 years. Traveling over land and looking for shelter from a deadly storm, the adventurers found what appeared to be a long abandoned tower near the edge of a desolate swamp. Then the trolls began coming out. It was almost like a tiny clown car filled with dozens of clowns. Except these weren't clowns, they were gruesome trolls. Troll after troll after troll just kept coming as the entire dungeon population came to engage the attackers. The players didn't realize the tower stood over a dungeon as ancient as it was huge. The players also failed to realize the troll lair was to blame for the lack of wildlife and settlements in the region. So troll after troll rushed out to defend their home in the wet swamp, since fire was less effective against them with so much moisture. When the players' characters were nearly defeated, having few resources, they thought they had won. The only trolls now left to face them were too old, too young, and too weak to be a threat. After killing the last of those frail creatures, out finally came the troll tribe's leaders. An Etten troll, with its 2 hill giant troll hybrids. Pretty sure only 2 characters lived through that, barely escaping with the bodies of their slain companions. That example can illustrate the importance of monsters defending their dungeon entrance. It's also possible the original dungeon complex had multiple points of entry, and the current residents intentionally blocked or collapsed those because they became security risks. Can't have any pesky trespassing do-gooders breaking in through a back door. Regardless of how many points of entry your dungeon has, there is likely to be a primary passage that is guarded by sentries, traps, or both. This is also the entrance most well known to nearby communities. Such an entrance may be spoken of in regional myths and legends. In our real world, every culture has stories of a boogeyman, myths created to scare members of that society into behaving in a manner deemed most beneficial to the well-being of that community. In our fantasy game world building, something as simple as a dungeon entrance could become the foundation for local boogeyman stories. Except in a game with actual monsters, these tales might be more than just urban legends. Bards might keep it in their pants after being warned of the cavern critters that infest the beds of those who engage in premarital affairs. If your dungeon is occupied by many different types of creatures, how will you explain their cooperation? These monsters might be simple mercenaries, but it is more likely to find them united for some compelling reasons. From worship of some dark power, to fear of a vastly more powerful leader that controls them. Perhaps a dragon or other similar fearsome beast has become the subject of worship by a cult. Its lair could be an immense and ancient dungeon complex now inhabited by multiple factions. Such a place may have numerous entrances and exits. Each faction, though all dedicated to the worship of their overlord, may have unique beliefs and prejudices. Without their leader, these lesser creatures would normally be enemies and easily defeated. But now, united under the power of their master, they have become a formidable menace to local civilizations. Or a dragon's lair could just as easily be a single cave mouth far away in remote mountains. This is especially true of younger and less established dragons. The cavern's entrance is watched carefully, but there is also a hidden rear exit known only to the dragon. Though dragons are fiercely proud and territorial, their intelligence and long natural lifespans have taught them the importance of a tactical retreat in the unlikely event of a determined superior foe. If you're creating a first level adventure, instead of a dragon, your fearsome beast might be a bugbear, leading some kobolds. When thinking about ecology and dungeon access, you'll also find yourself creating some of the surrounding terrain. My skulk example earlier provided multiple sources of food for the sewer-dwelling cowards. If your dungeon is far into the wilderness, your monsters could be consuming local wildlife or feeding on other monsters. And that concludes this video. But we still have so much more to discuss. My next video will take you inside the dungeon to learn what chambers you might wish to include, as well as the factions and organization of those inhabiting your newly created dungeon. I'll also be covering the psychology of dungeons as presented in mythology and how this could influence your designs. So if you want to continue learning about dungeon design, take a look at the videos already on the playlist and keep an eye out for future uploads on this topic. Also, I'm still working on a dozen other videos with topics ranging from that ultimate Big Wilb lore video I've been promising you, in addition to some videos about Gamma World, D6 Star Wars, Star Frontiers, espionage, role-playing, and many, many more TTRPG topics. As always, I'm your host, Atten, here at We Love TTRPGs, and I greatly appreciate your support by liking this video and letting me know in the comments if this has been helpful to you. And if you're new here, hit that subscription button so you don't miss any future videos. Thank all of you so much for your support and for watching. I'll see you in the next video.